think we are good to go. So once again, thank you so much, everybody here for joining. We are here for our very first virtual First Leaf wine tasting. So my name is Joe. I'm the digital marketing manager and a big wine lover. You might have seen a few posts of mine in the group. It has been awesome seeing everyone's bottle shots and awesome favorite wines and comments. And so I do have a big group of my team here, and I'd love to introduce everybody. But first, we'd love to just thank you for tuning in today, being amazing wine club members. And we'd love to especially shout out Joanne for starting this awesome group and helping this event take place tonight. So Joanne, thank you so much. While I do pass it off to my team, what I'd love for everyone here to do is just comment below with A, your favorite wine, and B, the amount of time that you've been a First Leaf Wine Club member. So please do drop your comments in there. In the meantime, I will pass it over to Krista.
Hi, everybody. I am Krista, and I am one of the personal wine concierge at the club here, and I've been here for about 6 months now. I am from right outside Philadelphia, and I've been in the wine industry for about 7 years. I worked for various distributors outside of Pennsylvania and Delaware, and I'm really happy to be here and experience this with all of you. And now I'll pass it over to Casey.
Sorry, I got stuck on mute, everybody. I'm Casey. I'm from Cincinnati. I'm one of the wine concierges here at First Leaf. I'm sure I've worked with some of you. I already saw some of you in the comments that I know very well. And I'm excited to be here tonight. I love working in the wine industry, and I think I am passing it off to Carolin.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. And it wouldn't be like a virtual event without someone leaving the mute button on. I'm Carolin. I am the Chief Wine Officer. I officially have the coolest title ever in the entire company. I've been here since the inception of First Leaf in Penrose Hill. Prior to that, I was working with a wine broker, negociant, doing sourcing for restaurants and on-premise and off-premise. Before that, I was the wine buyer and the beverage director for a national restaurant group. And before that, no, I'm kidding, I won't go any further into my history, but instead I will pass it to Ross here on my left.
Hi, I am Ross, and it's my job to make the very best wines possible for all of our members. And it's as easy as it sounds, and it's as fun as it sounds also. I've been making wine for nearly 15 years now. It's all I've ever done. So my skill set is very limited, but I like to think that it's very focused. And this is just such an awesome opportunity for us. We've talked about this for such a long time. And just the fact that this is the inaugural tasting, right? This is something that, from my background, I would have done so many times before, and to finally get the opportunity to do it with especially this group, which is just such a special group of First Leaf members. I'm just really excited today that we get to, talk about the wines a bit more. And we provide so much information, but there's so much nuance and there's so much context that we can continue to add. And that's what I hope we can do today for all of you.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. Thank you. So quick, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping rules. Rules sounds way too strict. This is here for fun. So quick things, right? Don't forget to comment below. We would love to hear from you. Casey will do her best to kind of answer all of the questions directly in the Facebook Live. If we see one question that's particularly popular, Krista will jump in and we can repeat it for everyone to hear. So keep those comments coming along. Number 2, the tasting will last for about an hour. We did have some technical difficulties, so we may be a few minutes late, but we will try our best to stay on pace. Lastly, we have, put so much work into this and work with Joanne, and we are so appreciative of every single one of you guys joining. So we really would love your feedback after the tasting, both on Facebook and through our survey, which will be sent out via email and of course in the Facebook group. So look out for that. We would love to hear your thoughts. So I hope you've got your red wines opened, your rosé and whites chilled, your aroma wheels out and ready to go, and of course, your taste buds ready to rock. So I will pass it on now to Krista to get us started, and enjoy.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you, Joe. Okay, as you guys know, we are going to be drinking tonight the Rakes Point Merroir, the Musa Noctuaria Rosé, and the Longitude West Cabernet. And we are going to start with our Rakes Point Merroir, and this is from the northern coast of California. And just a little tidbit from me, it seems to me that Sauvignon Blanc has become a really popular white wine this summer for various reasons. And with that, I will pass it along to Ross to give us a little explanation as to why.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And you're spot on. Sauvignon Blanc is rightfully claiming the crown of the top white of summer.
Yep.
Personally, what I love about Sauvignon Blanc is that you can go around the world, nearly every single wine growing region in the world grows Sauvignon Blanc, but within all those different regions is a completely different style of the wine. I love those different expressions. And Sauvignon Blanc is your go-to wine. When it's chilled, there's nothing else quite better than a glass of chilled Sauvignon Blanc at the end of the day. Just that crisp, fresh acidity, that bright, intense flavors. It kind of just ticks all the boxes of exactly what you need when you need it. So, to your point, Sauvignon Blanc is definitely, it's everywhere at the moment. And we have a host of Sauvignon Blancs in the club, but in particular, this is one of my very favorites. The Rakes Point Merroir, and from the 2020 vintage, so about as fresh as it gets in terms of,
Flavor profile?
Flavor profile, exactly. Do you want to tell us a bit about the brand?
Sure, but I want to ask why this one's your favorite, one of your favorites.
Okay, I try to pass it off, but I'll take it back again. So I think, really what makes this wine so cool is where it's from, right? It's from the North Coast appellation, which is basically north of the city of San Francisco. The North Coast really combines a few more different appellations, but it's kind of all these coastal influenced appellations. So you've got, Mendocino County, Lake County, Sonoma County, Napa County. All of these separate wine growing regions are all influenced by a large body of water in some way. Some of the ocean and some of the bay from San Francisco. And what you really get there is what we refer to as a diurnal shift during the growing season. What a diurnal shift means is that the daytime temperature and the nighttime temperature are completely different temperatures.
Yep.
And you get the vine, waking up during the day, shutting down during the night, waking up during the day, shutting down during the night. And what that does, you retain a lot of natural acidity in the wine. To Sauvignon Blanc, that's so crucial. A Sauvignon Blanc without acidity is kind of, the wine gets a bit lost. You really need acidity in Sauvignon Blanc to drive the palate and to bring all those other flavors into play. And so the North Coast is really getting to pick the parcels of fruit from your 3 or 4 or 5 favorite appellations. And all of these different appellations bring a different kind of Sauvignon Blanc to the mix.
Like a different amount of fruit coming in, or a little salinity,
exactly.
or minerality.
Like right by if you look at something that's influenced by the ocean, you're getting a lot more salinity. To your point, what we refer to as sea spray, where it's like a little bit salty, a little bit sweet, a little bit acidic. And then more inland, which is influenced by the bay, you're just getting that rock solid core acidity, which just maintains that freshness and just gives it that fruit purity.
Awesome. Well, while I talk about the brand, I would recommend everyone take a sip of their Rakes Point Merroir and see if you can identify certainly that acidity. I'm also getting, not surprisingly, a lot of lemon on the nose.
Yeah, I think lemon and citrus is, especially kind of that lemongrass or that kind of lemon rind is very, lemon zest, is common in Sauvignon Blanc, but more so in this wine, it's really the key of the wine.
Yeah.
Very fruit forward, a lot of citrus, but just really beautiful acidity and balanced by this kind of natural fruit sweetness in the wine. I just think it's drinking beautifully at the moment, and it's very timely, given the heat wave everyone's experiencing.
Yep. So obviously, if you have too much acidity, then it's just sort of like sour lemonade, right?
Yeah.
And if you have too much fruit, maybe it feels a little, flabby might be the way to describe it. If it just kind of tries to be rounder than this varietal wants to be, is my guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sometimes when you hear someone refer to a wine being overripe, basically you've lost too much natural acidity. You've pushed those fruit flavors from a citrus spectrum into like a really ripe kind of like when the fruit's been sitting in the fruit bowl for a little bit too long.
Sure.
So for us, it's all about retaining that natural acidity, because in winemaking, the biggest challenge is balance. How you can make a wine, it can have all these different characters, but how do you bring them all into balance? And I feel like we've done a great job with this wine.
Cool. Well, the label itself and the brand, Rakes Point Merroir, Rakes Point doesn't actually exist anywhere that I'm aware of. However, it does sound like many of the peninsulas and points here along the California coast. And Merroir is perhaps a made-up word, a take, if you will, on the French term terroir, which talks about all of the, climate influences on the grape. Well, miroir in my mind is, el mer, and the terroir of the ocean, which also influences oysters. So you can try oysters from around the world, and they will go anywhere from really buttery to, again, kind of very like salty or oily or unctuous. And so it goes with no surprise that a Sauvignon Blanc will pair beautifully with oysters and pretty much every shellfish and seafood, which is why we decided to make that the hero of this particular brand. As far as tasting notes you touched on, pairings, of course, I don't know, Krista, what would you put this Sauvignon Blanc with?
Yeah, I was literally just thinking that, and I was going to ask. So my favorite food ever is sushi, and I feel like this Sauvignon Blanc would go really well with sushi. But what do you guys think?
Wasabi's a tough thing to pair, for sure.
Yeah, I would say. I think sushi definitely, right? Because there's very little acidity in sushi.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where an acid-driven wine just balances the palate, and it's all about that balance again, right? So you're going to have that kind of fatty oiliness from the fish, and then that just piercing acidity of the Sauvignon Blanc, which just keeps your palate in balance. So there's never a lingering sensation of anything, right? You're just kind of counterbalancing the whole time.
Sort of cleanses the palate. So like a fatty tuna, maybe sashimi, as opposed to, a California roll.
Yeah.
And also, as you can imagine, summer fares, right? Those are entree salads. I think Sauvignon Blanc can go with calamari because it cuts that sort of that fat of the fry really quite nicely.
I was thinking the same thing with the calamari, actually. I think that Sauvignon Blanc is going to almost become like a pre-dinner drink, something to go perfect with appetizers. And then, you can continue your night with wine depending on what you're doing, or you can move into cocktails, whatever works. But I think a Sauvignon Blanc, to your point, Carolyn, with the calamari or any type of appetizer would go really well. French fries or anything like that.
Lobster roll. It is late on the East Coast. You all have probably eaten dinner. Here, I'm going to get hungry.
It's also worth noting the big old medal on the front, right?
Oh, right. Yes.
Just because that's kind of my job. So we can talk about the medal. I believe Rakes Point Miroir, yes, actually won a 91-point gold medal from Sunset Magazine. There we go.
And I love that we submit wines to Sunset Magazine because sometimes home, right? It is close to home, and sometimes some of the wine competitions can really be sort of competitions for someone who's maybe looking at more library wines or things like that. And I think Ray Isles at Sunset Magazine and his team, and certainly the judges that they would bring on the panel, thinks about, if you will, the folks, us general folks who just really want to find an affordable and approachable
it's almost like a lifestyle wine competition, right? Where it's, we're not sure some of the $1,000 wines get 100 points, but what about the wines that we all drink, right? On an everyday basis?
That's right. So
how do those do? So
that's why I enjoy every time we get recognized at Sunset Magazine.
That's great.
But my goodness, we've been chattering away about Rakes Point, and I know we're tight on time. So, Krista, where do we go from here?
Yeah, okay. Now we are going to move on to our rosé, which is the Musa Noctuaria, which is a rosé of Garnacha. And the first thing I notice when I look at this bottle is the absolute beautiful label that's on there. So I think I'll have you start, Carolyn, if you could just talk to us a little bit about the label.
Sure. I actually love this label. Musa Noctuaria. Rough translation, forgive me if you actually speak Spanish, is sort of like your nighttime muse, right? And so when we're thinking about brands, we're definitely thinking about not only like the place and maybe what might be part of the culture or the history or things of that nature, but also kind of the lifestyle. And so it's kind of a nice segue from the Sauvignon Blanc. When I think of Spain, and there's a certain sort of seductive kind of romantic feel to it. And as well, when I think of our Garnacha, we've got some nice florals and sort of bright lifted flavors. So this is one of three labels, or one of three wines under this brand. We did, the first one was a Tempranillo Garnacha blend, which just was like bold and sumptuous and lush. Just had some really nice kind of like more flavor than oomph, if you will, which is a really delightful way to enjoy a red wine. And then the Rosé de Garnacha, and then the Iron, right, which is a white wine. I want to say it's not quite as floral. It's a little light and bright with some tropical notes, if I remember correctly.
It's more your classic Spanish food wine, right?
Yeah. So that's bottling this month. So I'm excited to see the three together.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Hey, Carolin, I have a quick question for you. What is rosé mostly made of? Is it usually Garnacha, or are there other grapes that it can be made from?
oh my gosh, that in itself could be a whole nother Facebook Live, which actually would be a super fun one to do. As you know, rosé is everywhere. It started gaining popularity a couple of summers ago, and it's been in full force ever since. This year, we have really leaned into it. I think we've probably 12 or 16 rosés that we have, that Ross has blended, that we have brought into the club to kind of express the full range of flavor profiles. So yeah, it can go from, dry and more austere to really, fresh, fruity, floral. But the short answer is you can make a rosé out of pretty much any red grape. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the process for that? Since obviously
that's actually, color. I mean, I think in order to really answer that question, you've got to take a step back. And how was rosé made? So basically, we'll go even one further step back as to how is white and red wine made. So white wine is made from white grapes, and red wine is made from red grapes. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that the color comes from the skin and not from the pulp or the flesh. And so white grapes have white skin, white flesh. Red grapes have red skin, but also white flesh. And so when you're extracting color, you're actually getting it from the skins. And so how you would make a rosé is exactly the same way you'd make a white wine, but with red grapes. So it's very, very, very gentle extraction. You just want the juice. You don't want the skins. In the skins are your phenolics and your tannins, which are great for a red wine, but not what you want in a rosé. And so how you see different colors of rosé is a function of the varietal, but also of how the wine was made. So as a function of the varietal, some varietals have different colors, right? You can get a Sangiovese rosé, which is going to be that beautiful. Sangiovese and Garnacha are very similar, right? It's that very salmon blush, light colored. But if you then go and make a rosé from like a Malbec, it's going to be very, very dark colored.
Or a Pinot Noir.
Pinot Noir, yes, to the same extent. But then it's also got a lot to do with how the wine was made. So if you crush the grapes and you leave the grapes in contact with the juice for, say, 2 hours, you get a wine like this. If you crush the grapes, you leave it for 6 to 8 hours, you get a much darker wine. But that's all stylistic preference.
So if you see a darker rosé, does that mean you're going to pick up kind of more of the tannin aspects of that grape? Yeah,
it's going to be a richer wine. It's going to be, it may, and there's no positive or negative. It's a function of what style you like or what your preference is. Now, my preference for rosé is I want my rosé to drink like a white wine. That's why I'm drinking it.
So light, fresh,
bright. How do we get all the berry fruited characters? How do we get a rosé that best represents the red wine version of that wine, but it's got all the freshness, acidity, brightness, and lightness of rosé? And that's why, for me, Garnacha or Grenache is just the perfect grape for rosé because it's naturally light in color. And so you can extract a little bit more richness without getting too dark and getting too tannic and getting too phenolic. And for us, it was all about highlighting the variety in this grape, but also remembering that this is rosé. This is meant to be light and bright and enjoyed.
Would you guys say that rosé is mostly a summer wine, or do you think you can drink this all year round? And I also just want to mention real quick that it looks like our questions or our comments aren't working on the Facebook page. Oh, no. So I am going to just kind of ask some questions that I think some of our customers would really like to hear.
Yeah. I agree with the summer wines. And I also have another question if you guys get to it, because I have a lot of customers who love that French style rosé. I think we're aware of that. We're aware of the California style. And this is obviously a Spanish style rosé. So kind of, are they all kind of like this? They have their distinct flavor profiles, but.
I'll answer the summertime sipper or not. I mean, I think a lot of that depends on where you live, right? So in California, rosé actually pairs beautifully with Thanksgiving dinner. Like it really does. It does a really nice job of bringing out some nice qualities of turkey without overwhelming it. And it's also kind of leans into as you get deeper into that feast. Now, if I were on the East Coast, where I grew up and it was already freezing cold by then, I probably would not grab a rosé to start. So I think some of it has to do with kind of lifestyle, right? And certainly where you are in the world, as far as how long into the winter you might enjoy a rosé. We look to keep rosé active for our members between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And actually, just before Labor Day, we should be bringing in 2 sparkling rosés, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, 3.
3 sparkling rosés.
And an Italian cava rosé and a Spanish, Italian Prosecco, a Spanish cava, and then a California sparkling rosés. So it'll be very interesting to see if we can collect them all in kind of the final days of summer type of bundle to be able to give everyone to extend their summer. But talk, if you will, about the stylistic differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just quickly, the last bit I'll touch on is that kind of seasonality of rosé. And I'm a very poor example. I love ice cream in winter. So automatically that tells you that makes no sense. For me, it's all about the occasion. And I think that's why there's kind of French and more in particular Provence-style rosé, besides Brangelina having their own label, being popular. It's more so that, like, for me, rosé, more than any other wine style, really encapsulates an atmosphere and a moment, right? It kind of takes you to a place. And if I'm drinking French rosé, I kind of am transported quickly to, like, you know, the south of France. And it puts you in a different mindset. And I think that's why it's been so popular. And to me, Spanish rosé is absolutely the same as that. You know, it's the same style. It's about, what am I going to do with this wine? Less and less so, where am I going to drink this wine? Who am I going to be with? You know, you open rosé with friends and family, and it's an atmosphere and it's an environment and it's an occasion. Rosé is like synonymous with joy, right? It really is. It's like, so. It's not like I've had a terrible day, life is horrible, I'm going to drink rosé. It's like, no, you got something else. And so rosé is always that fun, friendly glass of wine to have. And I think that's why, especially a lot of the European rosés, we've even seen some amazing rosé out of Sicily. But Spain really is very special to me, especially where these wines are from. And so this is why makes it one of my favorite.
I will say for this one, just last week, actually, in the New York International Wine and Spirits Competition, this rosé won 96 points, double gold, Spanish rosé of the year.
And it's literally
legit.
We've just released it.
And we've just released it. So it'll be very exciting to see how it drinks throughout the summer. Mm-hmm. It will develop a little more complexity or character as it's.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to just continue to blossom, really, as silly as the term sounds, but it really will. It will continue to open up. It'll continue to get better. And really, I think this is going to be an amazing wine for the whole summer period.
I agree. Personally,
that's actually a good question, too, that a lot of my customers do have is there a rule of thumb on how long to keep a wine or how long to age a wine?
Look, there's many rules in wine, all of which are applicable to the person who's making those rules. The rules that we have, which are very unofficial and based on zero education, is that we release our wines to drink. That's really what it is.
Well, that's what we focus on.
That's
right?
That's our main focus. Is that we don't want to release. We don't want a member to get wines in their box and go hang on to these for 5 years. Like that's not the point. And so when we make our wines, when we blend them, when we prepare them, and we just are thinking about the member the entire time, in my mind, this wine being bottled this month is being drunk next month. Mm-hmm. And that's how we blend and create these wines. And so in general, that's a loaded question. But for us in particular, no, our wines are meant to be opened, are meant to be enjoyed. It's whenever you want to, but really a real hallmark of a great wine is that they're ready to drink immediately and they can last a couple of years. But for us, we really, if they're intended to be opened and enjoyed as soon as they arrive at your doorstep.
So I think it's fair to say that aging is done before we've bought
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
These wines didn't just come off the field, just get pressed, just get fermented.
No.
Right?
They're ready.
It really is a hallmark of what we're trying to do is bring fresh, approachable wines. And now, to answer your question more directly, I don't know that anyone lays down a rosé. that's not sort of the intention behind the wine. Not that it would deteriorate, but each vintage of a rosé is something like a vintage of a Beaujolais. Like it is a moment in time that you're trying to capture. So it's not really intended to, hold on to the summer of 2021 until 2025.
But I will say it's a great question, because it is a bit of an old wives' tale that, I'll go home to visit my dad in South Africa, and I'll pull out a 2009 rosé. I'm like, what are you doing with this wine? Because in his mind, he was like, well, I was told that you get a wine and you put it away for 10 years. And it's like, not all wine.
Also, just to kind of piggyback on that too, I have noticed on the Facebook page, not in our event now, but just kind of looking at some comments on there, is a lot of our members are starting to get wine fridges and ways to store their wine. Could you just touch a little bit about like what temperatures they should be storing their whites and reds too? I see that question come up every now and then.
Well, I'm going to say something before you get started, because I'm sure you know the more technical reason, but once upon a time, like keeping your red wines at room temperature, like if you go back in history to whenever that guidance was offered, people were living in like stone houses, right?
Yeah.
Like the insides of their homes were much cooler than maybe what our homes are with central heat and things like that. And so, room temperature in sort of modern day might be a basement or, a cellar if you have that kind of thing. A lot of the wine coolers these days will have different zones so that you can put your red wines and your white wines all within the same cooler, but they're kept at a different temperature. And what would be a good range of those temperatures, Ross?
So first of all, having a wine fridge is super cool. Whether or not it's going to make a wine taste better or worse, I can't talk to that. But often my wife will walk into me just staring at my wines in my wine fridge thinking I'm weird. But it's just a super cool thing to have in the house, right? Get into it. Wine is the coolest thing ever. The more you can get into it and geek out over it, the better. But to Carolin's point, right, you get a range of wine fridges. You get dual zone wine fridges, and whites are meant to be stored at 50 to 55, and reds are meant to be stored at 60 to 65. You can get into it as technical as you want. Really, I've got a pretty big wine fridge. It's a single zone, and I just keep it at 56 to 60. It varies. I'm conscious of electricity, so in summer when it's 110 outside, I turn that 55 up to 60, and it's all about consistency. It's not necessarily about that wine has to hit 54.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm used to Celsius. Fahrenheit. It's more so about just keep the wine consistent temperature, keep it out of the sunlight. Most wine fridges have this really cool kind of tint, right? Yeah. So I think more so than trying to dial in a specific temperature, it's about keeping the wine in the same consistent environment.
Makes sense, because you don't want it to spike hot and then go cold and then spike hot.
Because basically what the reason comes down to is that, liquid increases in volume as it heats up. So that's why you see your cork pushed up, right? It gets hot, or hopefully you don't see your cork pushed up.
Not with First Leaf.
Not with First Leaf. Other companies. And that increase in volume just causes the cork to pop up. And so that's really where you want the consistent temperature. Just let the wine just hang out until you're ready.
And before we move on to the Cabernet too, I also just want to mention to our members that right now we have a really nice collection of rosés on our featured bundled page. And that is like a really great way to try all different rosés, find out your personal favorites so that you can order more in the future. And when we come out with more, you'll be able to know exactly what kind and style that you love. So if anyone has any questions about that, Casey and I would be happy to help you guys with that as well. And with that being said, I think we're going to move on to the Longitude 120 West Cabernet from Horse Heaven Hills. And Ross and Carolyn, I'll let you guys take it away again.
All right, well, I'll step in. Now, I will point out I did have a hand in what we might offer today in this first Facebook tasting, and that's in part because I wanted to make sure some of my favorites were here. Longitude 120 West is actually one of my favorite brands. We have 3 wines yet again. They're all Cabernets, but they are coming from different points along the West Coast. And if you know your geography, the longitude, the vertical line at about 120 degrees west, runs along the coast of the West Coast of California and actually the whole country, right? And so the idea behind this brand is to highlight a different kind of vertical, right? In the world of wine, when you have a vertical, you're tasting, the 2018 of something, the 2019 of it, and the 2020 of it, for example. So we thought we would flip that on its ear a little bit and speak about a different vertical. And so this vertical is meant to highlight kind of 3 regions that go from, cooler to warmer between the 3 of them with one varietal, so that you could potentially do a tasting between all 3 and really start picking out the nuances that I know Ross will talk about. These wines also are pretty special to us. They're appellated, and maybe some of the jewels, if you will, amongst the gems, and that extra kind of handcrafted care that our winemaking team has put into it. I wanted to translate that to the label, and so this actual label is printed and foiled on real fabric, which was a fun project to work on with our printer as well, just to give you something tactical about this, like to give you this, if you will, rustic luxury and the juxtaposition of like the foil and then the texture of this like rugged canvas. So personally, I love the brand, and I think it does express something interesting about this wine, which I think ties into the regions that the 3 wines are coming from, right? They're a little bit, not esoteric, but I mean, cult, I don't know.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a culty element to the 3 being, Horsehaven Hills in Washington, Napa, and then obviously Paso Robles. Like you spoke too quickly, like about how the kind of the gems, it's one of those situations where you love all your children equally. Sure you do.
Okay.
No favorites. So this is totally not my favorite of the children. But for me, it's just really, Cabernet Sauvignon it's deemed the king of grapes, right? It really is. For me, it's the king of all varietals. It's where I've spent my kind of 15 years in, Western Australia, in South Africa, in Bordeaux, and now in Napa in California. Really, I've just had endless opportunities to work with the best of the best grapes and wine, and just getting to continue it now. And especially, I don't know any other brand or any other kind of wine that really highlights this longitude 120 West. I didn't even know that was a thing until you pointed out. I was like, oh, that's actually a very good point. But really, for me, this is almost, Napa and Paso Robles are incredibly amazing wine growing regions. But the beauty of the Horsehaven Hills is that it makes everyone go, oh, what's Horsehaven Hills, right? It's kind of like this thing that once you get in on the secret, you're like, oh, you don't know about it? And it really is that kind of culty element of that cult wine, those wines from Washington that get the 100 points, that get the 99, 98 points. They're always from the Horsehaven Hills. And for us, when we decided that we wanted to make a wine from Washington, it was like, oh, it's got to be Horsehaven Hills. It has to be this region. And to me, I'm so incredibly happy with this wine because it really it expresses the region in its best form. I mean, if you look at these 3, you've got Paso Robles, which has got an intense heat, and the wines from Paso Robles are just upfront, front palate, just really incredibly varietally true, but very plush and upfront. And you've got Napa, which is kind of like the middle child, right? It's the child that just quietly just performs in the background,
a little more
right?
Balanced,
exactly, a little more balance. You've got this balance between front palate and back palate, and everyone knows Napa and what Napa does. Then you've got Washington, which everyone goes, oh, Washington, it's cold up there. It's like, well, no, it's not that cold.
Everywhere.
And Washington, and especially Horsehaven Hills, gets a lot of heat, but the difference is that it's the duration of heat. And so when Napa will get a longer stretch of heat, and Paso gets a very long stretch of intense heat, Washington, and especially Horsehaven Hills, gets the same temperature and heat, but for a shorter period. And we talked about acidity in the Sauvignon Blanc, and this is where it comes back to Horsehaven Hills, and that shorter period is a little bit more of that diurnal shift. And in Cabernet, being able to retain that natural acidity in terms of the fruit profile also leans more towards that old world style, which is less focus on primary fruit and concentration and more a focus on savory, nuance, complexity, and just like layers of the wine.
So in contrast to like a California cab that might just be really jammy, fruity, black cherry, you're saying that there's we're getting some more savory notes. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean in wine?
Well, I mean, savory for us is basically what's not a fruit. It's, to put it in the most simplest terms, right? Where another Cabernet might have black currant and red currant. This will have more of a blue fruited character to it, and a little bit more bay leaf, eucalyptus. So it's really these dried herbs. So all these characters that may not jump out of the glass, but as you take a sip and sit back, they slowly just kind of trickle out on your palate.
Gotcha.
So it's definitely a wine that deserves that pause for thought. There should always be time to sit back and think about the wine. Like what else are you tasting? And that's where the aroma wheel comes in, right? Like, what are you tasting? And for me, it's really the Horse Heaven Hills is where it keeps you busy for a long time, because there's all these little different nuances, little different flavors, a lot of spices, a lot of cinnamon, and those all tie into those kind of what we refer to as savory characters.
Oh, I definitely get a lot of spice on the nose, and almost, I mean, is that the bay leaf I'm smelling? Probably, right? There's like it's not vegetal, it's not like a green pepper, but it's
just a kind of a dried herb, or herb character. Sorry, silent H.
Hey, Ross.
Yep.
Quick question for you. So speaking to Joanne, our Facebook group admin, and she's wondering why, if there is a reason, we started with white, then rosé, then red. Is that a typical tasting cadence, or is that just kind of random?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. Especially with wine, like why I really enjoy these types of interactions or tastings is because there's all this assumed knowledge, right? Like for me, I'm like, well, why wouldn't you start with the white? But if I'm asked to explain it, I have to like pause for thought. But basically, when we talk, if we think back to when I was talking about rosé and how you make rosé and what happens when you make rosé, all of the tannins and the phenolics are in the skins, right? And what happens is that is what lingers on your palate. Acidity doesn't linger, fruit doesn't linger, tannin and phenolics linger. That's that kind of salivating, prickly feel you'll get from red wines and to a certain extent rosés. And so basically because those linger, those will affect anything you taste or drink further. And so what we want to do with a white wine, by starting with the white wine, we know that your palate's going to be clean and fresh. There's going to be nothing else influencing your palate, and you're going to get everything about that wine possible. There won't be any lingering characters in a Sauvignon Blanc that are going to affect how the rosé tastes.
Because that citrus isn't carrying forward.
No, exactly, and there's no tannin, there's no phenolics carrying forward, so you move on to your rosé, which has got because of the color, you're getting a little bit more extraction of tannin, a little bit more extraction of flavor, and it's going to linger a little bit more than the Sauvignon Blanc would have, but because you've moved on to a red, now you've got a lot of tannin, a lot of texture, a lot of flavor, but because it's so much more than the rosé, it's not going to affect how that rosé would have tasted.
I agree.
Yeah.
I concur.
You concur? I mean, my theory isn't completely watertight.
So is it fair to say like appetizer, first course, second course? Although, of course, if you're a cab drinker, you might decide to just open
it depends how early you opened it, really. But yeah, I would think that's a great way to lean into it. Is that this is the appetizers or the hors d'oeuvres. This is trying to get everyone to sit down at the table finally, even though you've called them for dinner 20 times. And then this is really getting into like the meat and potatoes.
Okay, so now if I can, I'm going to throw a wrench in that. So we're talking specifically about the Sauvignon Blanc being the white wine, but there's a lot of really rich and buttery and unctuous kind of other white wines like Chardonnay, of course. Would you put a Chardonnay at the beginning of this sequence?
Great question. So no.
Thank you.
Actually, quite commonly, especially in Burgundy and a lot of kind of Sonoma Coast wineries, if you go to a tasting, you'll taste the Pinot before the Chardonnay. And that's
Pinot Noir.
The Pinot Noir. Yeah. So the Pinot Noir before the Chardonnay. And that's just mainly due to that they make very kind of rich Chardonnays, and it can often, influence what a Pinot Noir, which can be quite delicate, especially Burgundian Pinot Noirs, and so they taste Pinot before Chardonnay. I would say that's the exception, not the norm. I wish I was drinking Burgundy on a regular enough
basis.
Basis that I would have that problem. I don't have that problem. I will aspire to have that problem in my life. But yeah, I think if I was a gambling man, I'd say start with whites, move on to rosés, and then finish off with reds in general.
So is it fair, regardless of color, you're going from like that lighter, cleaner profile to that sort of maybe bolder or richer kind of lingering flavor profile?
Yeah, well, it's more so what's going to complement food.
Yeah.
And you don't start with the bone-in ribeye and then make your way onto the grapefruit salad, right? You go the other way around. Why? It's because rich, heavy flavors are saved for the end. You start off with lighter, fresher, brighter food, and food and wine they just mimic each other. It's very rare that you would pair a bright, light, refreshing wine with a very deep, heavy dish. So it mimics food, which I think a lot more folks are a lot more familiar with.
Sure.
This food styles and how you would, serve a meal if you had friends around for dinner. So think about it in the same context.
I'm glad you guys touched upon that a little bit, because I know our members are probably going to be wondering, what can I do with the rest of my bottles and my extra bottles? And I think a really good way, we have a holiday weekend coming up, is just have your own tasting at home and do your own pairings at home, find some recipes online. I think that'd be a great way for them to use up their bottles.
Yeah, I mean, if they have to, right?
I never have trouble using up my bottles. But we did include, and maybe Joe, you were going to talk about this, the little vacuum bin that we use quite often here as we're testing and tasting samples and deciding on bench blends and, what does the exact flavor profile look like. These little guys that you call Rickies.
They're amazing. They really are incredible.
They'll hold a wine, what do you say, 2 weeks?
I would say, I think there's something else to discuss if you have a wine that takes 2 weeks to drink. It obviously wasn't very good.
Or you were busy.
I would say that even more so. But anyway, moving on. They're incredible. I often do have times. I've got a pregnant wife, so I'm the solo drinker in the house at the moment. And I do need a wine to last 5 nights. And so these things are incredible. They basically just remove the oxygen from the bottle. Oxygen and wine can be, best friends or mortal enemies, depending on how much oxygen is present. So the safest thing is to remove as much oxygen from the wine, keep it in the fridge. A wine aging or a wine going bad is basically chemistry. And how chemistry works is that warmer temperatures speed up chemical reactions, cooler temperatures slow down chemical reactions, and a wine aging or oxidizing is a chemical reaction. So keep it in the fridge, get all the oxygen out, and you are good for at least a week, I would say.
That's great. We have another question from a customer, Roseanne, and she wants to know, what is the main difference between Cabernet and Merlot?
Trying to think of the simplest way to answer this. So basically, the main difference is
also one of you referenced the smells and like the aroma wheel with that one as well.
Ooh, okay, aroma wheel time. So I'll say the biggest difference, as silly as it may sound, is that there are different varieties, right? So it's I can't quickly think of a good enough comparison, but they're a completely different variety of grape. And so Cabernet Sauvignon is a blend. It's a hybrid between Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, I'm pretty sure. And so Cabernet Sauvignon is a lot more structural, a lot more tannin, a lot more richness. So what you'll find with Cabernet, actually, why Cabernet and Merlot are the 2 most popular grapes in Bordeaux is that they're the perfect complement to each other. Yep. And so when you taste Cabernet, what it typically tends to do is it goes down your palate and it does this big little, goes around the outside and goes back. So it starts off very full and then finishes really long, but it leaves this big hole in the middle, what we call like the shell, the seashell. And Merlot doesn't have a lot of front palate, doesn't have a lot of length, but it's got a ton of mid palate. And so you just piece that right in the middle. So that's why you see Cabernet Merlot blends very often. Now, from a aroma perspective, Cabernet can have such a variety of characters, but looking at the aroma wheel, from a fruit perspective, a lot of blackberry, a lot of blackcurrant and cassis, where Merlot can be more so that blue fruited, right? So blue fruited and red fruited, maybe a bit of raspberry. A character I often get on Merlot, which doesn't sound great, but is actually, I love it, is that kind of balsamic kind of character, that balsamic reduction, where it's this mixture of acidity and sweetness. Yeah. Merlots, though, I love Merlot. I'm a huge fan of Merlot. I love that mid-palate richness. If I'm ever looking for a wine where I'm a red wine drinker, I want a glass of red, but I really don't want to think much about it. To me, it's Merlot, because I know it's gonna tick all the boxes.
It's plush and it's lush. I would say it's also really good, obviously, with meats, but maybe does it go lean towards more stews or roasts or things like that, a ribeye, I think, really needs that acidity that you're getting out of Cab.
Yeah, I think Merlot is kind of a comfort wine. It suits comfort food, if that makes sense. Like to me, Merlot must always be something, and beef this is again, stew. Exactly. It's that beef bourguignon, it's the beef stew, and it's really, again, going back to where the wine mimics the food is, right? Mm-hmm. We all talk about comfort food, but what about comfort wine? To me, Merlot is that comfort wine where, like, you know what you're going to get. You know it's not going to be overthought. It's going to tick all the boxes, as opposed to maybe something like a Cab where you feel like you have to step up to the occasion of a Cabernet, right? It's like, oh, I'm having a Cab, well, I better get a steak, or I better do something special. Where Merlot for me is that quiet underperformer in the background, or quiet overachiever in the background. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it does definitely overdeliver. It gets a bad rap because of movies.
Silly movies. Don't let movies rule your life, right? Merlot is great with a hamburger. It's great with barbecue, absolutely.
Right? And to your point, Cabernet has a bit more structure, a bit more backbone. You're probably a little more intentional with that pairing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think to me, I'm a huge fan of Merlot. I've worked a lot with Merlot so far in my life. And what I do love about Merlot is that it's because it's got a bad rap. All winemakers who make Merlot try that extra bit harder because they know it's already starting off.
Overperforming.
Exactly. It has to overperform. And
that's a good hint.
That's what I love about Merlot. We've got an amazing Merlot. We've got a few different Merlots, but one in particular is a Merlot from Argentina, which I'm a huge fan of.
From Mendoza.
Yep, from Mendoza. So, high elevation Merlot. And that for me, that's one of our favorite wines that we do. My favorite wines that we do.
Nice.
I have one more question too. We have some wines in our portfolio that have like some earthy flavors. And when I'm describing them to members, it's hard for them to kind of understand what like an earthy flavor kind of means. Can you guys chat about that a little bit and how the best way to describe it to our members?
For me, my quintessential, right, I'm a visual person. So where I go is like the old barn, right? It's not full of a bunch of horses, right? It just has a rather neutral aroma, right? But you can smell that the wood has been there for decades, and maybe it's gone through seasons, and it's not dry rot, but it's not wet. It just like sort of that there's an earthiness to it when you walk into, again, a barn that's not full of hay or cows or anything like that. I think as far as winemaking goes, when you're talking about earthy, you are looking at some of those savory notes, maybe some spices, not quite like the Zinfandel spice or the Chinese 5 spice, but maybe some of those more earthy or even baking spices, would you say?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that earthiness, savoriness is kind of very similar things, and it's basically not fruitiness, right? So especially in the New World. So what we refer to as New World wine growing regions is pretty much everywhere except Europe, right? So it's the US, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, Chile, and a large focus of New World winemaking is very fruit driven. So it's a lot of primary fruit and its ripeness and getting the fruit as ripe as possible, which is great. But if you lean more to old world countries, like a lot of the European countries, there's a huge focus on the savory and earthy characters of wine. And to a lot of the old world countries, what that represents is the terroir, where the wine comes from. And they want the wine to kind of tell this tale of the land. And so the focus there is a lot more in terms of building layers, building texture. And along with that comes savory and earthy. But to your point, that earthiness for me is that's where a wine really starts to get complex. And it may not sound super enticing when you're talking about truffles and mushrooms and kind of bay leaf or cinnamon stick or herbe de Provence, but like that's where wine gets really cool for me, because winemakers haven't chosen the easiest way. They haven't gone the path of least resistance. They've gone like, look, we're taking a bit of a risk here, but we know what the potential outcome is going to be. And to me, it's like, again, I'm clearly very hungry because I'm talking about food again. But it's back to cooking, right? It's like, we could use one ingredient or we could use 7 ingredients. And to me, the savory ingredients, that's the savory, that's the earthy, that's the like, we've got to get this balance absolutely perfect. We're taking a bit of a risk, but the potential outcome is amazing.
So the
That's
fruit
great.
is taking a step back.
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
mushroom, even here on the aroma wheel, it's kind of this dusty mushroom is how they're describing earthy. I mean, it's almost like an umami without the sort of salt.
Yeah, 100, absolutely. And I think, I suppose we're all classified as New World wine drinkers, right? Because by default, we drink what's available to us. And part of what makes First Leaf so cool is that you're getting all this exposure to all these wines from around the world. And as you taste these wines from the old world and you start speaking to the wine concierge team and you start hearing about savory and earthy and you're like, I don't know if that sounds nice. They're like, no, it does. You've got to try this, right? And it's taking that leap of faith that you're entering a whole new world of complexity.
Yep.
A whole new world of appreciation.
And to bring it back, that's where this 47 Hills cab comes in, right? Because it still has that new world fruit, but there's something else that's kind of more prominent, right? It's not just sort of jammy, brambly, really pronounced fruit.
Yeah, for me in this one, it's just that real, just reminds me of that kind of Chinese 5-spice, that baking spice. There's just a lot going on in the background behind the fruit, which is what I love about this wine.
Got it. And before we kind of wrap things up here, we have one more question. We have a big holiday weekend coming up. Casey and I have a bunch of appointments all day, tomorrow and Friday, and we want to know what you guys think would be the best First Leaf wine to pair with barbecue foods this weekend.
Besides these three?
We could do both. One of these and then maybe another one.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to think of what Zinfandels we have. That's a classic.
The barbecue wine of choice.
Yep, barbecue wine of choice is Zinfandel. We have Tailored Republic Zinfandel.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Which is Central Coast, I believe. If I remember correctly. Could be just California, but so why is a Zinfandel great for barbecue?
Yeah, I mean, Zinfandel in general is like, it's 4th of July, right? Zinfandel is American. It's as American as American gets, right? So if you could only choose one wine to drink on 4th of July, it better be a Zinfandel. There's nothing more patriotic than drinking Zinfandel on 4th of July, even for a South African.
Unless you call
who's
it
legally allowed to be here.
Yeah. Unless you call it Primitivo and it's
so for me, it's picking up any Zinfandel. The beauty of Zinfandel and barbecue wine is that, again, it suits the occasion, right? There's all these other different flavors going on. Typically, what is barbecue? Barbecue is a ton of flavor. It's a ton of everything. There's smokiness to sweetness to acidity, and you need a wine that can kind of can adapt to any condition and any kind of occasion. For me, that's Zinfandel. It just ticks all the boxes. It's also a very familiar wine. It's a wine that everyone will take a glass of. No one has any kind of preconceived notions about Zinfandel. And for a very good reason, because it suits all occasions, suits all food types. But it is the most patriotic wine.
I'm very happy to hear that because Zinfandel is my absolute favorite grape varietal. I love a jammy, really bold Zin. And actually, I just looked at our stock, and one that we have in stock that is my favorite First Leaf wine is the Whip Stitch Zin.
Oh, that one's awesome.
That is my absolute favorite. Yeah. So that's what I'll tell everyone about the next couple of days.
Absolutely.
I mean, the thing to remember with barbecue is it's really strong flavors. You want your wine to match it. Otherwise, you kind of lose it on the palate, right? The barbecue sauce will overwhelm it.
Yep.
And so we're talking barbecue and probably meat, but if you're barbecuing fish, that's the reason why this bright acidity will stand up against kind of a nice sort of a citrus lemon or a shrimp on the barbie, as they say.
Got it. And since we have about 5 minutes left, are you guys good with 2 more questions?
Please keep the questions coming.
Okay. All right, great. The first one is any new wines that our members should be looking out for in the near future?
Oh my gosh, we have so many new wines. I'm actually excited. These are bottling in August, so they'll be around to the club and members in time for autumn. We have a great group of wines coming from Italy. So a couple of Super Tuscans, Sangiovese, Vino Rosso, and I think that these particular wines, even if we were to taste them together, is expressive of a lot of different characteristics that are coming out of Italy. And so even though that is an old world place, right, some of the nuance of the styling, I think, really stands strong for each one of those?
Yeah, I think it also speaks to Italy in general, right? Like, as wine has spread, or grape growing has spread throughout the world, a lot of countries have adapted the classic French varieties like Cab and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, and where Italy's gone like, nope, we're going to stick with our 256 native varieties. We're going to kind of do our own thing. That's what makes Italy so special. Our Vino Rossos is a blend of, multiple different native varieties, Sangiovese, Vermentinos, Pinot Grigios. So those always are amazing wines.
Yep.
I, in particular, coming up real soon are some more Australian wines, which I'm really looking forward to. I love the Australian wines. It's just the boldness, kind of the brashness of Australians is reflected in the wines also, and just the concentration of the fruit, which I really enjoy. But I mean,
we have some beautiful wines coming in from South Africa
Yep.
that really are capturing some of that coastal influence, but it's a different kind of coastal influence from California.
Yep.
So if you were to get a California and a South African Chenin Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc, I would really explore the taste profile between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the beauty, right? It's taking these varieties that are grown in different regions and comparing them. I mean, closer to home, the Fog Break Pinot Blanc, 92 points from Wine Enthusiast, which was awesome. So there's endless options. I think I would bankrupt any member that really wanted my suggestions.
And that kind of goes into the second question too. One of our members asked if we have any Super Tuscans right now, and if not, although there's one coming soon, but what would also be something similar to a Super Tuscan?
We should have the Citra is it not?
That's soon, but we should still have the Tenuta and the if not soon. But we definitely have had a Super Tuscan, and we will. If we don't now, we will have soon again. A huge fan of Super Tuscans. If we don't have Super Tuscans, we've got the little the baby brother, which is just our Vino Rossos from Italy, which again are amazing. But yeah, if we don't currently, we will very soon have Super Tuscans back in the mix.
We have the Tenuta and the Menagia. They're not in stock right now, but I'm sure they'll be back relatively soon. And then we do have the Tintoretto Vino Rosso as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, great. All right, good. Well, I am going to pass it along to Joe now.
Awesome. Well, huge shout out to my team and all of our participants today. And again, a special thanks to Joanne for starting this amazing, amazing group. We do apologize for some of those technical difficulties. Unfortunately, we did start a bit late, but this video will be recorded and provided to all of our members in this Facebook group. So feel free to kind of pop on our website, buy these wines, and maybe run through it with family and friends. Also, don't forget to use your VacuVin on any of your unfinished wines. We know some people like me are alone out there, opened up 3 bottles of wine. Don't forget, these will last for about 2 weeks. So throw that in there or enjoy it this weekend with your family and friends at a barbecue. Also, as you know, the Wine Concierge service is completely free of charge. So we totally encourage you to reach out to our team and schedule an appointment. The link is right there at the bottom. And you can kind of just discuss your profile, upcoming shipments, your wine preferences. And of course, Krista and Casey will be there to kind of walk you through the First Leaf experience and improve it in any way possible. So keep an eye out for that link also posted in the group. And don't hesitate to schedule those appointments. Lastly, we will be posting some awesome deals in that Facebook group because we are so thankful for all of you guys coming together and talking about this amazing beverage. There is so much to learn, so much to explore, and we hope to tackle more of tastings just like this in the future. Look out for that link to the survey. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your night.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.